Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to learn about some German words which we use on daily basis. So let's begin. Our first word is hallo. Hallo, which means hello. Auf Wiedersehen. Auf Wiedersehen, which means goodbye. It is a formal form of saying goodbye in German. Now, let's look at the example. Auf Wiedersehen, bis morgen, which means goodbye till tomorrow. Tschüss, tschüss, which means goodbye. It is an informal form of saying goodbye in German. Now, let's look at the example. Tschüss, bis später, which means goodbye, see you later. In German, we say alles Gute for wishing someone all the best. Let's look at the example. Alles Gute für die Prüfung, which means all the best for exam. Ja, ja, which means yes. Now, let's look at the example. Ja, ich spreche ein wenig Deutsch, which means yes, I speak a little German. Nein, nein, which means no. Now, let's look at the example. Nein, ich bin ein Inder, which means no, I am an Indian. Danke, danke, which means thank you. Now, let's look at the example. Danke für deine Wünsche. Thank you for your wishes. Deutsch, Deutsch, which means German. Now, let's look at the example. Sprichst du Deutsch? Do you speak in German? Willkommen, willkommen, which means welcome. Willkommen in meinem Land, which means welcome to my country. Vorname, Vorname, which means first name. Now let's look at the example. Mein Vorname is Michael, which means my first name is Michael. Name, Name, which means last name. Now let's look at the example. Mein Name is Schumacher, Schumacher, which means my last name is Schumacher. Bitte, bitte, which means please. Now let's look at the example. Bitte mach die Tür zu, which means please shut the door. Wo, wo, which means where. Now let's look at the example. Wo wohnen Sie? Where do you live? Wohin, wohin, which means where to. Now let's look at the example. Wohin fliegst du? Where are you flying to? Wie viele, which means how many. Now let's look at the example. Wie viele Kinder haben Sie? How many children do you have? Wie viel, which means how much. Now let's look at the example. Wie viel Geld haben Sie? Which means how much money do you have? Wie lange, which means how long. Now let's look at the example. Wie lange hast du Deutsch gelernt? How long have you been learning German? Wie, which means how. Now let's look at the example. Wie geht es dir? Wie geht es dir? Which means how are you? Was, which means what. Now let's look at the example. Was essen Sie? What are you eating? Warum, which means why. Let's look at the example. Warum lernen Sie Deutsch? Why are you learning German? Wann, which means when. Now let's look at the example. Wann kommen Sie? When will you come? Where, which means who. Now let's look at the example. Wer bist du? Who are you? Woher, which means from where. Woher kommen Sie? Woher kommen Sie? Where do you come from? Richtig, which means correct. Falsch, which means false. In German, we use Entschuldigung for two different words. One is sorry, another is excuse me. Now, let's look at the examples of both the words. First one is sorry. Entschuldigung für die späte Antwort, which means sorry for the late reply. Now, let's look at another example. Entschuldigen Sie, Herr Lehrer, which means excuse me, teacher. SATZ, which means sentence. Now let's look at the example. Schreiben Sie Sätze, which means write down the sentence.